All right. Welcome back, everyone. I mean, welcome back as in this is my second big group with you guys. I am Dr. Garland Thomas-McDavid, CEO and president of North Lawndale College Prep, and I'm also subbing as principal for the Christiana campus. So I've decided when I took that role to make these videos to touch base with both of the school families that are under the North Lawndale umbrella, and I'm really enjoying the idea of thinking about you all throughout the month and wondering, what it is that I should say to you at any given time. And so right now, what came to my mind is Black History Month. This big group is falling on the first day of February, which is Black History Month. So happy Black History Month. We need to celebrate and acknowledge all the wonderful things that Black people have added to our country and to our world. And so because I'm a teacher, at heart, I am going to touch base on where Black History Month comes from. Does anybody know? Does anybody know in your advisory? You should be watching this in advisory. So I'll pause to see if any smart students want to answer within their respective spaces. If you said Carter G. Woodson, you are correct. Carter G. Woodson is the father of Black History Month, and ultimately he believed that in order for Black people to move forward, they needed to look in the past. So we need to have a sound and firm understanding of our history, of how we got here and what we've overcame and contributed over the years to understand where we have the potential to go and to continuously guide us. So let's celebrate him, and let's celebrate this month where we lift up the beauty and excellence that is Blackness. And along those lines, as we talk about celebrating and loving and appreciating who we are as a people, given some recent events, some tragic events that I'll discuss later in this talk, I felt like I wanted to share my own personal journey of learning to love myself. So I'll start with the little story, right? You see the little guy with the broken heart saying, do you know where I can get this thing fixed? So ultimately, in my years of living, I've gotten some things right and I've gotten some things wrong. And one of the things that I really struggled with is relationships, not relationships with friends or family members, but relationships around love. And again, I'm choosing to be very vulnerable and honest with you all because I want you to understand that I'm a real person and that the people around you are real people who go through things, and you're not alone or unique in what you may be challenged by. So I found myself repeatedly failing at relationships. Things would start off good and everything would go good for a while, and then these things started popping up, maybe some red flags that I should have paid attention to and I ignored, until ultimately there would be a big explosion, right? Where you can't take it anymore. And then after that, I would eventually leave the situation. And so I chose the picture of the guy saying, do you know where I can get this thing fixed? Because I had to go see a therapist. I felt like I can't keep doing this in my life. I need to understand what is wrong with me. So I remember walking into the therapist's office and saying, what's wrong with me? Why do I keep on ending up in these bad relationships? And she brought me back to Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. If you're ever in any field of social sciences, you will take psychology courses and you'll learn about this hierarchy that talks about what we need, how the order in which we need to have our needs met, our basic needs, and how it contributes to a healthy development and belonging. But ultimately, without the right foundation, you can't healthily build these other constructs on top of it, right? So you see the first one is physiological needs, right? That's just safety, food, water, air, shelter, just those basic things that people need. And even as I say that, I know that like I did growing up as a child, some of you don't always have all of those things, right? So we talked through how I grew up, and we talked about things that I experienced in my childhood, not just inside of my house, right? Because there were things there. There was a period where one of my parents was on drugs. There was domestic violence. There was child abuse. There were financial challenges, right? So things that you might take for granted, like food or electricity, warmth. There were a lot of creative ways that we got through those times, whether it was boiling water on the stove to heat up the house or opening the oven to dry your clothes after you've washed them by hand, or doing everything before the sun goes down because that was going to be the only source of light that you had. So like doing your homework and all of the things that are part of being a regular student. Those were things that I experienced. And while you might be in a situation like I was and believe that those things are normal, they're not normal. And so it took a long time for me to understand that everybody didn't grow up the way that I did. Everybody didn't witness their parent calling them names. Everybody didn't witness their parents knocking them around as a little girl like they were a grown man, or seeing a parent pushed down the stairs by the other parent, or seeing a parent put out of the house constantly by the other parent, and what that does to a child when you miss that other parent, want to see that other parent, don't know what's happening to that other parent. That was stuff that was happening to me as a child inside of my house. Outside of my house, I lived in a very difficult community. At the time that I was growing up in Brooklyn, New York, there was violence everywhere. We were amidst the crack epidemic. So there was crack everywhere. There was shooting, prostitution, just a normal walk through my neighborhood. Anything could happen. You could encounter anything. So when you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs and you understand what it takes to have a healthy foundation, when I talk about those things, when I talk about those experiences, you know that those things are broken, right? And so a part of my relationship issues, what I came to understand was that I didn't have the healthy foundation that you see in Maslow's hierarchy. I was missing a firm foundation in physiological needs. I was certainly missing the next level of having all of my safety needs met. I was always afraid. I was always afraid. And that fear doesn't always manifest itself the same way, you know, because if people who know me, they'll say, you're a very brave and courageous person. But that doesn't mean that I didn't walk around with an anxiety around what's about to happen. Something's about to happen. Because there was always things just popping up. There were always things just popping up. So the safety wasn't there. So again, the hierarchy, right? You can't build on a broken foundation. Anytime anyone is building a home, they'll tell you the most important thing is to check the foundation. The foundation has to be strong. So there were cracks in my foundation, much like we saw in the heart. And so as we talked, I began to ask the therapist, what's wrong with me? And her response to that was, there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. And I want to say that to all of you now. No matter what you're experiencing, no matter what you're going through, there's nothing wrong with you. I was speaking to my cousin recently, and we're both very well into our adulthood, and she said, you know, I didn't know I had trauma growing up. And looking at her, I was like, what? Because, you know, we grew up on the same block, and I know about things that have happened in her life, as well as grief and loss from her mother dying, followed by her father dying, and then her little brother dying. So it just kind of was like, what do you mean you didn't know you had trauma? And I think that it's important to point out the brokenness and the masks that we wear. Because if you look at me now in my life, or at that time when I was going to see the therapist, you would have said, Garland is not broken. Garland doesn't have trauma. Trauma is not experiencing or impacting who she's become. And the masks that cover up our brokenness are not negative, right? So Garland is successful. She has a degree and a big job, right? Garland is generous. She cares about everyone, and she's always there for other people, and she gives to other people. And Garland is a yes person. If you ask her, she's going to say yes. Even if she doesn't have it, even if she's tired, even if she needs to do something else for herself, she's going to say yes. Garland is a perfectionist. Everything that she does it perfectly, right? And that might not necessarily come from outside of yourself. The perfectionism that I operated with for many years was a burden I had placed on myself, right? So the mass of these brokenness is like, well, I couldn't control the things that were happening in my house. I couldn't control the things that were happening outside of my house. So you grab onto whatever you can control, and you try to control those things and make them perfect. And sadly, sometimes those things are other people, like your children and things like that. So it was very pivotal in my life when I came to understand where this drive for perfectionism was coming from and how unhealthy it was for myself as well as others. But the problem that I want to bring you back to on this list is the selflessness, because I was selfless in a very unhealthy way. I put everybody before myself. And it was important for me to backtrack and think about understanding the need to love people out of a love that I had for myself, a love that started with myself. So I have a quote here that says, "It doesn't matter how beautiful or successful others believe you are if you can't see it." And that's the reality. I didn't always see what other people were seeing. So they would say, "What do you mean? You are so beautiful." And I would be able to tell you 20 flaws that were wrong with me. I would deny every compliment that was given to me. Or, "What do you mean you're not successful or you feel like a failure? Look at all of these things." That I had, remember going back to that pyramid, that hierarchy, I had a broken foundation. So I didn't learn to love myself. I didn't learn to value myself. I learned to be whatever other people needed or wanted me to be. I hadn't spent time understanding who I was and what I liked to do and what I wanted to wear and where I wanted to go, right? And so I bring that up because I want you to understand that charity or love begins at home. It begins in you. And we are called to love other people as we love ourselves. So I didn't stop being a caring and generous person. I didn't stop being a giving and loving person. I just also give to myself now, right? I give to myself because I understand that I can't pour from an empty cup. I did that for a really long time. I say no now if I don't want to do something. I was considering an opportunity recently and someone said, well, don't worry about it. You don't have to. And I said, oh, no, don't worry. I don't do anything that I don't want to do. And that might sound arrogant or it might sound rude if you interpret it through the wrong lens. But if I don't have a desire and a love to push me through the hard things, then I don't want to do it. And my time belongs to me. And just because something is your ministry or your cause doesn't mean it needs to be mine. I don't need to be everything. I don't need to do everything. We have a world around us. And the same way that my calling might be education or my calling might be developing other leaders, there's someone else's calling that is working with early childhood or working with small children. There's someone else's calling who's making other people's homes beautiful. There's someone else's calling who is, growing the earth and improving it and making it more beautiful and safe for others. You don't have to have every ministry. And I don't have to think and feel the way other people expect me to think and feel. And I don't have to show up as a Black woman the way a white woman shows up to make anyone comfortable. I had to go through a process of embracing Garland. And I went through this recoding with my therapist where we worked to separate the early definition that I had of love, where love hurt me and abused me sometimes. And because it was so early in my foundation, subconsciously, I stuck with it. So you could look at someone and say, she's so stupid. Why do you keep doing this? Or why do you? And they don't realize or know that they're broken. And their understanding and definition of love is broken and it's wrong. And so we had to go through this process of recoding love and understanding that love doesn't abuse you, that love shouldn't hurt you, right? Not intentionally and not repeatedly, that I didn't have to give people chances to hurt me again. It took me many years to learn that I could forgive someone and not allow them to continue to hurt me, not allow them to continue abusing me. Those two things don't go together. So you can forgive, I can even love you and say, I'm leaving because it's not good for me, right? So we had to go through this process of recoding. And I know that right about now, you guys might be like, well, Dr. T, that is great. It's great to hear you talk about these things, but what does that have to do with Black history? And what does that have to do with students at North Lawndale? I want to talk to you and lift up the fact that we had another girl killed in a loving relationship in our school community. So this first one is a slide of a young lady who was a freshman in college. She had gone through all of her K-12 and worked hard to be a Phoenix Pact Scholar, right? That's a unique program at North Lawndale. I'm gonna give it a shameless plug where students maintain a 3.0 and get 0 out-of-pocket costs by attending partner colleges, right? And so she was at Michigan State and she was home for break. And unfortunately, she was with a boyfriend that many people knew was not good for her, who didn't love her in the right way, but in the broken way. And ultimately, it resulted in her being killed over the break. And I saw that, and I took that in. We all heard about it. Just a beautiful young lady, right? No, you guys. Love doesn't abuse you. And what I know for sure in walking around high school campuses and founding a high school in Inglewood, being a CEO at another charter network and now at North Lawndale is I see you trading your self-love. I see you allowing people to talk to you and treat you in a way that is unacceptable. And so you can't tolerate any level of that abuse because you never know when it's going to go here. And here's the next young lady that was killed. And this one is a senior. You see she has her uniform on. And just a vibrant young lady full of personality that has now left a hole in the school because we're going to miss her. We wanted to celebrate her. We wanted to support her and go off to college with her. It breaks my heart. I imagine it breaks their mothers' hearts, and it will continue to break their fathers' hearts and their families' hearts, you guys. And I wonder, in looking at this picture of this young lady with her hair done, nails done, everything did, right? You see what I'm saying about the mask, right? But she's in a relationship with someone who is hurting her. And I wondered, like, who knew about it? Did she maybe tell her friends about it? Was she keeping it a secret? Did somebody maybe see something that didn't feel right or seem right and not tell her because they didn't want to upset her or get her upset? Or was she forceful with her mom or dad about going to be with someone that they didn't believe was good for her? And while these situations have ended tragically, I can say I've been guilty of the same thing. It just didn't go that far, but it could have. Just like the situations that you might be in. And so I lifted up this message because I wanted to speak to all of you about us needing to address and understand the trauma that has caused us to tolerate abuse in the name of love. And for me, it was way too late by the time I figured all of that out. It costed me a lot. Time, resources, things and experiences that weren't good for my psyche and my memory or my children's. It costed me a lot. And I don't want that to happen to you. And God forbid we lose another life to it. So I want us to, as a community, let go of the stigma and the fear of being alone. Because I know for me, I stayed in those relationships where people were hurting me because I was afraid. I was afraid, what if no one else likes me? What if no one else wants to be with me? I could only see the deficits in my life. I could only see my mistakes and my failures. And so I felt like, well, no one else is going to want to be with me. And we judge people when they're alone. As much as I may be embarrassed at times when I have to say like, hey, I failed at that 3 times. I don't want to be the person that's staying in a situation because they don't want people to talk about them or judge them. I genuinely desire to be fulfilled. And while it may have taken me longer to leave those situations, I'm glad I did. And so I want you all to understand there's nothing wrong with the season of being alone. You have other sources of life, and you'll never get what you can get as long as you hold on to something that's less than what you deserve. So I want to read this quote to you from one of my favorite people, Brene Brown. "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. Choose courage over comfort. Choose whole hearts over armor. And choose the great adventure of being brave and afraid at the exact same time." So whether it's being afraid to leave a relationship or afraid to leave home and go to college, afraid to do anything, apply for that job, go out for the part, do it afraid. Right? I feel fear all the time. Someone asked me that, like, don't you? Yeah, I get nervous. Even thinking about coming up here and talking to people makes me nervous. I've had to overcome an intense shyness, right? Sometimes the symptoms of shyness are physical, right? My arms feel weak. My stomach starts to turn. I feel this weakness over my body. But I know I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to show up anyway, and I'm just going to do it afraid because I'd made a decision at a point in my life that I will never let fear beat me again. So even if I feel scared, I go for it. And I want you all to go for it as well. So before we move forward in this month, I want us to take this opportunity to reflect about what's my responsibility. Because you can look at these young ladies and say, well, I'm not in an abusive relationship. Well, are you a friend to someone who is? Are you a person who is hitting people, talking nastily to people, right? Are you a friend of a guy who's doing that? And you're not saying like, hey, man, that's not right. Don't do that. Or a girl, it doesn't matter because sometimes women do it too. We all as a community have to pay attention and interrupt nonsense, right? That's one of our Kingian nonviolence principles. We interrupt nonsense, right? So we can't sit quietly while we're seeing someone go through something that's not okay. We need to affirm them. We need to let them know they are loved and let them know they are not alone. Post-traumatic growth is something that I read about. I've heard about PTSD, and I know you all have heard of that too. Like, oh, that happens after you go through trauma, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's even worse and harder to think about PTSD if you've lived a period of time in your life, like your childhood, consistently immersed in trauma, right? There's trauma that's like, boom, there was a car accident. There'll be trauma from that. Or I witnessed something bad happening. There'll be trauma for that. But that's different than something you're living through year after year after year. And I came across the idea or the notion of post-traumatic growth and latched onto it as something that I definitely believe defines me. So Maya Angelou said it this way: I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it. Post-traumatic growth is the benefit of finding positive psychological change and choosing it, deciding I'm not going to let this break or define me. So when I talked about going back and recoding, wiping away this bad definition that I had of love, like my therapist said, hey, stop taking on projects with people that you date or are in a relationship with. You like to help people. You like to fix things. You like to solve problems, but you can't do that in a relationship. Accept people for who they are. Stop seeing the potential that a person may decide they never want to become. People have to work those things out on their own. So a part of post-traumatic growth is going back and addressing what happened to you and acknowledging it's not right. Not internalizing that this is happening because there's something wrong with me, or there's some mistake or error that I made that's causing this bad thing to happen. And understanding that it's not your fault. It's not your fault. It is not your fault. It's not your fault that someone may be molesting you. It's not your fault that someone may be hitting you. It's not your fault that you don't always have the things that you're supposed to have in your house, right? That's not your fault. And it's not a reflection of any weakness or inadequacy in you. And so post-traumatic growth is about understanding and unpacking that, and then allowing yourself to make the decision to grow through it. Whatever you go through, we talked about the character traits in the last big group. Whatever you go through, whatever obstacles, whatever challenges, you have the power, the mind to rise above it, right? So you don't have to let your circumstances define you. And in so many ways, we have to constantly give ourselves a message that you matter, right? You matter. It took Dr. TM a long time to understand I matter too, right? I don't only have to be in relationships where I give, and expect nothing in return, right? Where I love wholeheartedly and don't receive that same love in return. When I'm honest and truthful and faithful and don't receive that in return, I don't have to tolerate that. What I want matters too. And that's not to judge anybody or call anybody a bad person. A lot of times people hurt people out of the pain that they've come through, out of the brokenness that they've come through, but they don't get to act their brokenness out on me. That's theirs to work out with their therapist. I can choose to say, no, thank you, and walk away from it because I matter that much. Learning to give yourself the place and grace you so easily give to others, right? That's what I want you all to learn. And I want to share a filter with you, right? I had to get a filter that I filter experiences and relationships through, whether it's a friendship, a place that I'm working, a boyfriend, someone who wants to be my boyfriend. When I go back to this filter and check to make sure it's good for me, if there's any part of this that's missing, then I'm out, right? If there's any part of this, I'm out. So I'm going to share it with you. It's a quote by Alex L. You deserve to be in spaces and relationships that make you happy, that feed your soul and help you grow. You are worthy of connections that are loving, nourishing, and genuine. Before you settle for anything less than, remind yourself that the places you visit and people you journey with through life should make you feel safe, loved, and enough. And that's my filter. I share it with you with hopes that you all latch onto it as well. I wish that the young ladies that I share photos of, I wish they knew that and really understood it. And lately I've had to push a lot of people around. It's one thing to know something. You can say, oh, I know. But if you're not actually doing it, if you're not actually practicing it, then you don't really know it at a high level, right? We call that the taxonomy. You need to be able to apply it to your life and genuinely walk away from things that don't make you feel safe, loved, and enough. Those are signals to you to exit ASAP. So I'm going to close out with a poem by Maya Angelou. It's one of my favorites, and it embodies the very resilience, the grit, the post-traumatic growth that defines Blackness, that defines who we are as a people and who you can choose to be in this life right now, still today. So when I started, I talked about Carter G. Woodson, and I talked about Black History Month, and I talked about his belief that we have to understand and reflect on who we are based on our history and what we've done in the past to go forward. And that very thing is what this poem exemplifies. That very thing is what I want you to walk away with today. Still I Rise by Maya Angelou. You may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trod me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I'll rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I've got oil wells pumping in my living room, just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high. Still, I'll rise. Did you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders falling down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries. Does my haughtiness offend you? Don't you take it awful hard? 'Cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I'll rise. Does my sexiness upset you? They do get mad, y'all. Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that is rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am, and you are, the dream and the hope of the slave. And so we rise, we rise, we rise. Thank you, guys.